Hello and welcome to On Point. This episode features a conversation with Brian Elliott and Andrew Wolgemuth, co-founders of Wove, a 21st century jeweler bringing the jewelry designer directly to couples for custom engagement ring creation. Brian Elliott is a serial entrepreneur with a passion for reinventing outdated consumer experiences. At Wove, he focuses on digital product, UX, and marketing. He previously worked in two former venture-backed consumer startups. Prior to this, Brian served as a platoon leader in the U.S. Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, leading a team of 40 special operators in unconventional environments around the world. Andrew Wolgemuth grew up in an entrepreneurial environment, working at his parents' jewelry company. After attending West Point and serving as a platoon leader in the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, he attended Stanford's GSB's Ignite Entrepreneurship program, where the idea for Wove was born. In this episode of On Point, Brian and Andrew speak about their varying paths to attending West Point and discuss how years of military experience are applicable to entrepreneurship and help drive their work. They discuss how the tight-knit West Point community helped to support their vision and afford them their success. They also talk about how they're disrupting the engagement ring industry by changing the way people buy rings. Now, please enjoy this interview between Brian Elliott, Andrew Wolgemuth, and your host, Tim Shaw.
Welcome to On Point, founded by Eddie King, West Point class of 2008. I'm Tim Shaw, West Point class of 2004, and today I'm joined by Brian Elliott, class of 2014, and Andrew Wolgemuth, class of 2015. Brian and Andrew, how are you two?
Tim, how are you? Great to see you again.
Likewise. Let's get into our first segment, AAR, or for our non-military listeners, After Action Review. In this segment, I'd like to touch on specifically what other veterans can learn from you, your process, and your journey. So, Brian, can you please tell us about your decision to attend West Point?
Yeah, I had about opposite paths in front of me as an 18-year-old. So path number one, which was like go to the University of Chicago and go have a lot of fun and, compete in wrestling in college. And then I had path number two, which was go to West Point and follow my dad's footsteps in public service. And ultimately, inspired by my dad, chose to go to West Point. When I reflect on that, my dad was a guardsman. He wasn't a West Pointer. I'm not some sort of extra lineage. But when I was a kid, my dad volunteered to go to Iraq in 0405. And I remember it was truly a volunteer billet that he wasn't a task assigned to it. And I remember that decision really had a huge effect on me as I was evaluating two very different paths in my life, where he took a step to sacrifice his time and away from his family to give to the greater good. And I remember being so inspired by that, still to this day. I think that's ultimately what drove me towards that path, and ultimately meeting Drew, and a decade later, building the best engagement ring experience possible. So I'll hand it over to Drew.
Yeah, I actually had, like Brian, I had no military background really whatsoever. My family was my dad's side in farming. My mom's side were scientists. But around middle school or high school, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Discovery Channel Surviving the Cut, but I remember watching the Special Forces selection and assessment being like, I want to do that. So wanted to enlist. My parents were like, absolutely not. You're going to get a degree. And my sophomore year, my dad was like, hey, you should check out West Point. So was really fortunate to have someone in my life named Jim Carter, who was the chaplain at West Point a few years ago. And that's really who introduced me to the West Point community. And from that point, I kind of fell in love with this idea of being able to attend. And 6 attempts at the SAT later, got in. So I was pretty excited to attend.
Drew, did you apply 1 year and then have to reapply another year?
I did not. So I got really lucky. I was fully prepared to go to the prep school or go somewhere else for a year. But I was probably one of the last people to be admitted to my class. I think I found out in January or February, which is, I think, pretty late compared to most cadets.
And what were both of your West Point experiences like?
Yeah, I optimized for fun, Tim. So I had a very deliberate path where I wanted to get just good enough grades to get stationed in Europe and be the last cadet to get stationed in Europe while having as much fun as possible with my friends on the weekend. And by that account, West Point was an absolute success for me. Drew might have had a different plan going in.
Well, I was going to say, I think I optimized for survival. So I love my West Point experience. The first year, I absolutely hated it, like just about everyone. Was really close to leaving, ended up staying, and loved the last 3 years. So I rode on the crew team, got to study abroad in Portugal, had some amazing opportunities that, I absolutely loved it.
We've interviewed 4-star generals, venture capitalists, and their description of their West Point time has just been so interesting. Some of them are like, I barely made it through the first year and I was going to leave, but then my father said, just give it another month, and I decided to stay on. So it's just always fascinating to hear people's experience. Brian, it sounds like you did excellent backwards planning. Were you able to get into Europe?
Yeah, we ended up in Germany. I think I was like the last cadet to survive the cut into the infantry Germany placement, and definitely made the most of my time over there.
And so beyond plebe year, what was your cadet experience? Did you walk a lot of hours? Were there particular classes that were super impactful? Any mentors?
Yeah, I was a systems major, as were all of my roommates. We just really went through the whole thing as a cohort for like 4 years and shared the same mentor, shared the same activities. So really like a lot of groupthink going on in company H4. But, I loved systems engineering. It's like a discipline of like how things fit together in the world. And it's just naturally how my brain works. So the fact that there was this discipline that I could nest my thinking in was a lot of fun. So I got a lot of passion out of that from like an extracurricular standpoint. I wasn't athletic enough to even make a club squad team, but I jumped into training for dive school my sophomore year, went through that, and then spent the next couple of years training cadets and prepping them to go to dive school. And so I focused a lot of my extracurricular activity into that small niche of people. And I just found them to be incredibly motivating as a group of people that were willing to commit to that level of training. And so that was my group of folks outside of the company.
I rarely talk a lot in this podcast. Well, maybe listeners are like, no, Tim, you talk too much, but I want to double click on this, which is you're talking about CDQC.
Yeah, that's where I spent a lot of my time training up cadets after I went.
CDQC is Combat Divers Qualification Course. And so you went to CDQC your summer before your Cal year?
Yeah.
When I was a cadet, it was very hard to get one of those courses.
It was when we were there too. Brian's being humble. It's like, I think the hardest summer training you can get. So
I owe all of it to this. Like, I was not a swimmer. I never like swam competitively, but like this swim team just like drug me along through the whole course and through the train up. And I took like so much away from that experience, just about like how strong collective mindset is. And so like the first time I achieved any of these activities was when I was surrounded by a group of people that just said, hey, like you can do it, just like push through. And so like that was a really, really powerful group of people and kind of time in my life to realize like if you just surround yourself with the right people, it doesn't matter if you've never done it before, like you can probably get it done.
This is a very sensitive point you brought up. I really wanted to do CDQC. I trained up yearling year, Cal year, even first year with the hope that I could do it after first year. And a lot of my West Point classmates know I spent a lot of time training up for that, but unfortunately never got to go to the course for a variety of reasons. But that's awesome. That's quite an accomplishment.
Tim, I understand you're pretty young still. Maybe come in as a civilian, get a rep in.
No. Andrew, would love to hear about your 3 years at West Point beyond plebe year.
Yeah, no, I loved my time as a cadet, junior and senior year. Walked a few hours. I wasn't like, near the Century Club or anything like that, but most of my time, the first 2 years was spent with the crew team. And then the last 2 years really got involved with the crew of guys that I was able to go to Portugal with. But yeah, loved my time as a cadet. Did, the typical airborne summer, and then did SEER school my last summer or second to last summer, but absolutely loved it. Had a great experience. And then, yeah, I was very, very excited to graduate.
You two know each other at West Point?
We did, but I was, a year older than Drew, so I always acted like I was too cool for him. We had a lot of mutual friends that like really are what eventually drew us together after West Point, specifically when we were both in the Ranger Regiment. I think when we really gained a meaningful relationship.
And Drew, what major were you?
So I was actually a management major. I was very much focused on getting the best GPA I could. I thought it was going to basically dictate, the next 5+ years of my life. And so kind of optimized for GPA, which actually I think it worked out okay for me. I started off as an econ major and switched. So I don't know what that says about me, but I actually ended up with an okay GPA. If I went back, I'd probably do it the same way. One of the things I look back on isn't even what my favorite course content was. It was the professors that I had in those courses. It's interesting. I don't really remember any details about any class in particular, but I remember almost all of my favorite professors from those courses and stay in touch with a lot of them. If I had any advice to like a future cadet, it would be choose classes that you're inspired by the professors and kind of lean into them as mentors.
Brian, too cool for school as a cadet?
I remember Brian more as an acquaintance at West Point. Always hanging out with the dive team or the CDQC guys. And I was kind of like, you know what? I'm like the crew guy. I don't know if I fit that level of coolness, but yeah.
Brian, walk us through your decision to choose infantry.
I was inspired by a few mentors as well, like Andrew's experience having some instructors in the systems department, guys that were from the Ranger Regiment or guys that were SF that were previously in the branch of infantry. And so just interacting with them as humans, they were so inspiring and talked about just really being at the decisive point of the Army as an institution. And that was very attractive to me. And so if I was going to do the Army and that was what I was going to do, I wanted to be at the decisive point of the organization and truly experience it and be able to have influence on soldiers that were at that decisive point and sort of get them through those moments in time. And so love that I chose infantry, would do it 100 out of 100 times.
Drew, how about your decision to branch?
Yeah, I think the biggest decision, like Brian, was mentor. So I got really lucky. My plebe mentor was David Utlau, who was like legendary in the Ranger Regiment. I think he was like first captain as a cadet when he was at West Point. Awesome guy, kind of somebody that encouraged me to stay at West Point through my plebe year. And I think was probably someone that was very influential in changing my mind from going the SF route to pursuing Ranger Regiment. Couldn't speak like more highly of him, but that was really a big decisive point. When I went to West Point, I imagined my life would look like Band of Brothers afterwards. And so I was like, if I'm going to do the Army, I want to do Army things. And so that's really what led me to want to do infantry. It's probably why Brian and I are both in entrepreneurship. There's like not a whole lot of tasks that or applicable skills to the real life after infantry besides leadership. So I loved my time in the infantry, loved IBOLC. I was at 4th ID after the Army and then was at 275 in Seattle for the last 3 years. But yeah, would do it exactly the same if I did it again.
Points one, Utlau was my first captain when I was a plebe. So definitely know that. He was also in the same battalion, 1st Brigade, 25th ID during my first deployment. Incredible person. I'd say I'm very biased here, but his wife is even more impressive. Haley's a classmate.
Oh, she's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Had some time with Haley as well. Plebe year. Their story is just incredible. They're like some of the most resilient, strong-willed people I know.
Both of your journeys sound like it's heavily driven by mentors, but given both infantry, both Rangers, both entrepreneurs, a little bit of a sadomasochistic streak in both of you.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, if it's hard, it's probably worth doing. Somebody told me once. I hope that ends up being true because I've really leaned into that and learned in the infantry and in the time of the Ranger Regiment to at least have a high tolerance for pain, which could be the most useful skill as an entrepreneur.
Brian, so Drew walked us through his Army career really quickly. Can you walk us through? So you went to Germany and then could you progress through there?
Yeah, so, went to Benin, actually went to Ranger School 2 weeks after graduation. So we were like the first class to flip that. So showed up, had no idea what I was doing there. So that was a blast. I then went to IBOLC after that, which made IBOLC way more fun. So really optimized for fun in that route. Went to Germany, loved my time out there. Great group of folks, great platoon, amazing platoon sergeant and team. So spent about 5 months of that time in Poland, just driving around in strikers, getting to see the country, and then assessed into the 75th and went to Savannah, Georgia, which is 1st Ranger Battalion for a reason. I always tell Andrew, and so got the opportunity to spend a few years there, lead a platoon into Syria right when that kicked off, which was really everything that I had hoped for in terms of having an opportunity to be there and experience all of that training up to a culminating moment, and just like very humbled by the folks that I was able to go on that deployment with and the things that they were able to do. And then, went to Afghanistan the year after that, doing about the opposite of what I did the year prior. So I went from, no electricity, no running water, to being in the embassy the next year in Afghanistan, hanging out, setting the initial hopes for the future peace agreement with the Taliban that absolutely fell apart. But that's what we were at least thinking about at that time in history. And got out a little after 5 years and moved to the startup space.
I want to double click on a common Army acquaintance who's not a West Pointer, but someone who has been, I think, a pretty big impact in both of our lives, Scott Cheney. And so he was my company commander. I think he was your battalion commander?
In Germany, he was, yeah, Tim. And so he assessed me for my Ranger PT test, like head to head. Funny story on this. So Scott Cheney, he was the regimental XO and spent a lot of his time in the Ranger Regiment for context. And then he was my battalion commander in Germany. And, he tells me, hey, like, I'm not letting you go to RASP until you complete the whole RPT, like with me head to head. And I lived like 25 miles outside the base. And the morning I was doing the RPT with Scott, Colonel Cheney, we used to call him, my car broke down. So I had to bike into work. And so I biked on my not road bike into work. It was probably 25 kilometers, not miles, and then had to do the full test in 5 mile after just doing a 25-mile bike ride, and like squeaked out like a 39-minute, like 5 mile. He was like not psyched with me or my lack of planning, but ultimately like let me go to RASP. I'm very, very, very thankful for that.
Who was in better PT shape, you or Colonel Cheney?
He was definitely a better mountain biker than me. He had thighs that were like the size of my torso, but I think I had him beat just because of age.
Fair enough. Just because I want him to listen to this episode, I was always better than Scott Cheney in PT in every aspect. And he was a fantastic company commander. So we're going to move on to this next segment, the sit rep or the situation report. In this segment, we're going to dive into what our guests are focused on today and how their vision is transforming the future of industry and society. Could you please give the audience an overview of your post-military career and bring us to where you're at today with Wove?
Yeah, happy to, Tim. So I transitioned out of the Army to a pre-seed tech startup that was really B2B2C at the time, eventually transitioned to B2C and got to understand what it is like to be in a chaotic company that does not have product market fit. That gave me undue confidence, I think, that I could go out and figure it out better on my own. So I tried, and I did for a while. And so started a company in the consumer space that was really focused on providing stress solutions to employees and monetizing through some unique partnerships. And so launched that company called Olden, raised a few $1 million, put the team together, and the company ultimately did not work out due to the number one reason why companies don't work out, which is co-founder conflict. And so, learned a lot from that lesson. Mainly, don't team up with 3 people you don't know. There's a perceived lack of options at that point in my career, but I'm super thankful for the experience and getting to go 0 to 1 and drive all of those lessons into Wove here with Drew. And so the timing worked out perfectly. After Alden, I knew I had a few criteria for what I wanted to work on. 1 was consumer. 2 was a problem that I had felt personally and that I knew was deep because of my experience with it. And then 3 was value alignment with the person that I was building it with. And so all of those lined up with Drew and the opportunity here at Wove. And so been working on this for the past year, and it's been an absolute blast getting to see the moment in couples' lives when we help them nail this moment. As a quick aside, I got engaged or tried to get engaged several years before this and botched the experience pretty badly. I ended up not getting married. And so when I say that I know the problem is real, I definitely felt it. And when Drew came to me with the space he was thinking about operating in, it was really the stars aligned. I'll let Drew tell a bit about his background.
Real quick, before we go to that and hear Drew tell a completely opposite story and how he's responsible for all of your successes, all kidding aside, Brian, a lot of our listeners are veterans transitioning. Did you think about business school or not?
I thought about it. I applied, got in, ultimately deferred that option and dove right in. And so I think Brendan, who runs Retain Learnings, if folks want to follow that on LinkedIn or on Substack, I recommend it. There's a lot of good writing and thinking about this subject in particular. And ultimately, I think everyone's decision is like super unique. I don't think there's a right answer or a right approach for how or when.
Cool. Drew, please.
No, absolutely. So I actually wasn't planning on leaving the military initially. Had my next duty assignment picked out. I knew exactly where I was going. But like right before my 3rd deployment, had a little bit of a military accident. Ended up during a nighttime stress shoot, breaking my neck, jaw, and knocking out most of my teeth. And kind of led me down this road that I didn't want to go down towards, a med board. So submitted a few waivers to stay, wasn't able to stay. And it triggered this kind of moment in my life where I was like, okay, like what's next? And the obvious choice was B school. So spent most of my 2-week block leave that the Ranger Regiment gives you twice a year studying for the GMAT, poured a ton of time and resources into that, applied to schools. I was really interested in entrepreneurship kind of from the beginning. And so based on that, kind of picked schools that I would be interested in. Got into a couple, got waitlisted at GSB. That's really where I wanted to go. I know I'd throw that out there because I know you're a GSB guy, Tim, but essentially ended up getting out of the military and taking the next 3 months and working in my family's business. So my family owns a brick and mortar jewelry store. That's kind of the connection to the jewelry industry for myself and for Brian. But spent about 3 to 4 months working in the business, learning everything I could from my dad, kind of evaluating if I was going to take over the family business or pursue this idea that had been stewing in my head about Wove since getting out. And the other thing I'll throw out there is one of the things that allowed us to really get a head start on Wove was on my way out the door, out of the military, had the opportunity to do the Stanford GSB's Ignite program, which is essentially a 1-month crash course in entrepreneurship. You get to have the opportunity to work with GSB professors, some amazing peers, and really test out a venture idea and work on developing the earliest stages of a business. And so really that was where we first started working on Wove and this idea, bouncing ideas off, developing what the consumer journey would look like. And after about 3 months of working my family's business, kind of doing this on the side, teamed up with Brian. And that was kind of the confidence boost I needed to fully quit the family business. Kind of goes back to the masochism that you were talking about, kind of had like a very easy path in front of me. And I felt like I left that because we had so much faith, and we do have so much faith in this idea and what we're building. And that was kind of the first 6 months out of the military. We were super fortunate. We were able to raise a round of funding pretty quickly on, and then kind of the rest is history. But yeah, a very non-typical military transition. It was really hard the first 6 months, kind of transitioning from the military, figuring out what was next. But a major silver lining was teaming up with Brian and kind of finding the confidence to go out on a limb and go all in on an idea. And that's been like one of the hardest things, but also one of the most rewarding things I think I've ever done.
So many follow-up questions on Wove. First is, how did you two meet? So you two knew each other at West Point. What came about saying you two are going to work on Wove?
Yeah, so my brother-in-law, Tom Curran, was a 2015 West Point guy, was at 175 with Brian. And so Tom had been like very involved, obviously, with Brian at 175. I was obviously talking to Tom like every week, and he knew what I was working on. And he was like, oh my gosh, you have to team up with Brian. Like, this would be a great partnership. Brian definitely fills like all of the holes that I had in entrepreneurship, raising capital, how to start a business, major holes. Brian kind of filled those gaps in this partnership. And so Tom, I think we have to really, give him a good bit of credit for putting us together. And I remember Brian flew down from Boston one weekend. I think it was like 3 days after we had made like a text acquaintance. I think we had one video chat over 30 minutes. Like the next weekend, Brian flew down. And I think within like 5 days, we were like, okay, let's quit our jobs and do it. It was very fast and didn't look back at all.
Tom worked at Alden as well, one of the earliest contractors and employees there. And then Tom worked with me, in Savannah. And so we had years of established kind of a relationship where Drew and I only worked really together in passing as 275 would take over the helm when 175 ripped out of country, and they would try to take the credit for everything that we did. So all joking aside, like having that relationship where Tom worked for me as a founder and knew how well Drew and I would work together in that specific environment, which is so contextual and so different than working hand in hand in the military.
Just to kind of add, something else as well, I think it is so important for founders to find people that they're compatible with. And I think what really accelerated that for Brian and I is is this shared background of West Point. And then even more specifically, Ranger Regiment. I think like there's a very specific standard, very specific type of person that usually ends up there. And I think that really allowed us to have kind of instant confidence in who each other were and probably accelerated that dating period quite a bit. I always think about it now, like if I had to go out and find another co-founder, I would be scared to death because, you face a lot together and there's a lot of things you have to overcome. And I think having that sense of shared values is so important.
Last week, I was in Austin. I ran into Evan Seal, another West Point entrepreneur, and he was telling me how delightful his fiance and wife is about the ring, and he got the ring from you all. I'm curious, a lot of questions associated with this. One, are there other veterans that Wove has served? Is Wove now helping more than just veterans? And so if you can share a bit more about where Wove is now and what you all are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to date, we've worked with 30 plus West Pointers on their rings, which has been an amazing opportunity. I've worked with my Ranger privates. I've been able to work with a ton of people from across the military that are at this stage in their life where, they want someone that they trust. They want to know they're getting a quality product. And they want to have this amazing experience with their partner. And so the idea for Wove actually kind of first started when we were working with a lot of service members overseas that they wanted to build a ring. They wanted to be able to step off the plane getting back from Afghanistan or Iraq and pop the question to their loved one, but they didn't want to ship a $5,000 to $10,000 engagement ring overseas. So that's really what triggered this idea of sending replicas instead of sending final rings. And so, our replicas look and feel indistinguishable from the final ring. They're made with non-precious materials. So, if I held up a final ring and a replica right next to each other, you couldn't tell them apart. Service members have played a huge part in the founding of this company. And then as we transitioned into COVID, with many of our non-military friends that wanted to get proposed, but jewelry stores were closed, or they wanted to buy from us, but they lived across the U.S. This business model really kind of grew, and we realized, this is something that is so much bigger than just serving the veteran or the military community, and we can really offer this to everybody, no matter where they're at. So I think COVID really accelerated our timeline, but yeah, I think serving veterans and serving those in the military is obviously always going to be very, very near and dear to Brian and I. It gives us probably the most joy out of working with any client is working with our friends in the military.
I want to double click on that. I just recall when I was a young lieutenant or first lieutenant, and USA had a jewelry store back then, an online jewelry store, which they don't have anymore. And I actually have talked to the corp dev folks at USAA and said, what happened to it? Why'd you shut it off? And you all should work with Wove. I'm curious, why do you think there's been such product market fit with veterans? And of course, like now you all have expanded to civilians, but what is it about that veteran cohort?
I think there's actually a pretty clean product market fit with people that trust the experience. I think we break the trust barrier so much faster for folks that are veterans and they see our background and they hear the story and they're sort of drawn to it from a marketing and acquisition perspective. And so I think that's what allowed us to enter that community and gain so many clients and customers there. That being said, we've really broken the trust barrier. I mean, that broken as in, people trust the experience. It looks real and legitimate to an outsider that would just stop by our website where, we're just getting lean startup method. It didn't have as much of that social proof that you would expect to spend $10,000 plus sometimes on an engagement ring. And so it was really easy for that community to look at our background and trust what we said. And now our customers everywhere are the social proof of how incredible our experience is and really like how high of a quality our product is.
I think also a lot of the military communities kind of always in this state of transition. You're always moving. You're likely not living in your hometown where you know a jeweler. So, we can really serve people anywhere. We've sold tons of rings to Alaska, Hawaii, all over the place. So I think that's also a big factor.
I don't know if you can share this, but if you can, what's the most expensive ring that's been bought?
Gosh, we've sold like some around $50,000. That's like the highest price point we've hit. We've worked on some $75,000 rings that are in the works, but I would say our average order value is around for an engagement ring around $10,000 to $15,000.
$50,000 on an engagement ring? If so, don't tell my wife that. So full disclosure, Context and myself are investors in Wove, but it's not just me. There's a number of other West Pointers, Sam Ellis and Mike Leffer. And I want to say, Brian, you're classmates with Sam Ellis.
We're not classmates, but he's definitely like served in more of a mentorship role for me right when I got out. And so, Sam put a large bet on me in my first company, and that didn't work out. And then he turned around and put another bet on me right away. And so that's like the greatest professional compliment I've ever received from somebody. And like, I feel pretty indebted to him for making that bet and betting on me to make it work. And so very, very grateful for his mentorship and his belief in what we can build here. And he will get whatever allocation of any future company I build that he so desires.
I want to talk more about the West Point community and how that might have empowered you all. So your customers, a number of them are veterans and West Pointers, your investors. Anyone I missed, any contingent, anything else you want to elaborate on?
I think we had even more veterans invest than that. We had PenFed invest. We had General Nicholson backing an early investment from us. I remember I saw General Nicholson in 2018 when I was in Afghanistan, and we got to spend some time together because I was working at the embassy. And then a few years later, he's investing in my Andrew and I's jewelry company. And so it's kind of funny how folks move in parallel like that. And in the group of folks that Mike pulled together in the syndicate for us, there's several veterans even in that cohort. And so very, very proud to have several veteran investors and an incredibly diverse cap table, not just from a military experience perspective, but from all representations. And I think one of the reasons we have such a diverse cap table is like this product doesn't necessarily speak to like typical venture capitalist based on their background. But if you are a veteran, you get it. If you are a woman, you get it. And so that's typically what our cap table looks like.
General Nicholson is a West Pointer, and he talked about his West Point experience briefly with me one time. And I just want to highlight just the West Point community and this podcast, AOG Associated, and West Pointers want to help West Pointers. Anything else you all want to share on current day Wove? You are currently open for business and looking for more customers to delight. Anything else?
Yeah, Tim, I think it might be helpful if we just gave a quick overview of the process for folks that are interested. Drew, do you want to take it away on that?
Really what we wanted to build with Wove and what we found looking at the industry is that this industry really hasn't changed in like the last 100 years. It's someone walks into a jewelry store, they buy a ring, they leave, they propose. And so there's been so many things that have happened in our world, development since, that have really allowed us to change the way people buy engagement rings. And so really what we created and what our process is a couple will visit our website at Wove. They'll fill out our design quiz, which allows us to discover what they're looking for, what their style preferences are. And based on that information, we match them with one of our jewelry designers who then will get on a Zoom call with the couple, help them discover what they're looking for. And within 24 hours, we get them a technical sketch of really beautiful sketches. We've had customers literally frame these in their house after receiving them. And once we give them that sketch and we discover, yes, this is what we're looking for, that's when we deliver a realistic replica ring to our clients. So typically takes about 10 days, oftentimes less. We get our clients a realistic replica ring that looks and feels indistinguishable to the final ring. This allows them to test drive it from home, wear it out, see what your friends and family think, make sure that you absolutely love it and you're making the right decision. And once you're ready, we'll help you with diamond selection, and then we'll build you the final ring. And then kind of that added bonus is you get to keep the replica ring as an adventure ring or a travel ring. If you go to Rio de Janeiro and you don't want to risk, losing a $10,000 engagement ring, you can take your replica with you. So there is no other company that is offering this level of service or this process with the custom replica ring. And so we're really excited. It really only became possible in the last couple of years with 3D printing technology. So we really feel like we're ahead of the market and really excited to offer this process to our couples.
Couldn't have said it better myself, which is good. Very aligned. True. I think a few things that folks love about the process. One is it truly is a one-of-a-kind design for couples. And so you're not going to have the same ring as somebody sitting next to you. Even a small detail to know it's truly built for you because you're going to wear it forever is something that couples really love. The second is to try before you buy. That's the truly unique selling proposition that people love. But the third thing that folks love is it's crafted right here in the United States, and most engagement rings are not. And so we have true master goldsmiths right behind me over here that are putting these rings together. This isn't built factory style overseas, and that ensures the quality of craftsmanship is incredibly high. It's built for life. It's built for you to be able to hand down decades into the future. And so proud of the craftsmanship that goes into each and every one of these rings that's truly built to last a lifetime. So those are the reasons that folks usually buy with us beyond just loving the story. And we're just really excited to have this experience for couples that is to navigate what can be a rather stressful purchase and kind of a confusing user experience. So the fact that we could simplify that, and we could be on folks' team, and we can deliver a product that we're really, really proud of, and that we're proud to give to folks that we served with, which is the highest, I think, quality barrier that Andrew and I could ever get to is shipping a ring to people that we served with. I think makes us sort of proud of the work that the folks that here are doing every single day.
Give me a second to extend this analogy, which is when I see a ring, I see something that's really beautiful, but I know that there's a lot of work put into it. And I would say that's the same for entrepreneurship. And so can you talk about some advice you have for aspiring entrepreneurs or veterans who are transitioning that are thinking about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And so I think there's this question that is, how do I start a company, right? And I think what I would challenge folks that are with that company is to reframe and say, how do I test an idea? And if you remove the stress and the pressure of starting a company, which comes with all of these legal constraints and structural constraints where you're really focusing on the wrong thing, but instead say, I have an interesting idea. What's the fastest way I can test this without a technical build? And you go out and test that idea. You remove the constraints and the barriers. Now, how am I going to fund this? And you just go out and focus on the hypothesis. The founder of Maven wrote a much more eloquent article on this than I just described, called Minimum Viable Testing. We'll drop it in the show notes here, but really focused on testing the single hypothesis that you want to test, figuring out what the white hot risks of failure are, and going out and de-risking and worrying less about, okay, I want to start a company, I'm ready to go. And I think that's the approach that I think Drew and I, at least I took the second time around. I wish we had taken it the first time around, and really de-risking the major parts of the user experience, ensuring that it's an experience that people love, and then dive into, okay, how am I going to form the team? What's the capital structure? And make sure the unit economics work out once I have a truly unique hypothesis formed out. And don't be afraid to ask for help.
Entrepreneurship can sometimes seem really cool, but it's a lot of work. And a lot of people analogize entrepreneurship and many things to a marathon. And so going back to that Ranger 5-miler, would you say it's somewhat accurate what you're doing at Wove is multiple 5-milers just right after each other?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're both laughing because it's there's certain days where I feel some days are easy and some days you wake up and you feel like you have to literally will this thing into existence. And it's not going to happen without a fight. And, we've iterated on this idea probably 5 or 6 times. So going back to Brian's previous statement, it's so true. But yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing, I divide my whiteboard in 2 every day. It's creating value and it's running operations. And at the end of the day, I need to be doing more and more things on the creating value side of that column than running operations, because those are things that we can train talented people to do. But if you're not creating value every day, then your company's going to stay stagnant. So completely agree. Lots of daily 5-milers.
Tim, I think the analogy for the community here might actually be it's like a long ruck march, and only because it's a lot of transferring weight back and forth, and thankfully Drew's a great ruck marcher, but that's really what having a great co-founder is somebody to share the load with, and then creating a team of people who want to take that load, and then you're able to put more and more value into your rucksack. And so I think that analogy for this community probably makes sense, as folks can remember being on some rather long hikes in the woods and having a partner there that said, "Hey, I'll take some of the ammo, or I'll carry the 240 for the next stretch," and knowing how meaningful that is in that time. And that's what having a partnership in entrepreneurship for me feels like.
Love it. Let's get into our next and third segment, the SOP or standard operating procedure. In this segment, we're going to talk about the personal routines, habits, and words to live by that have been instrumental to both of your success. What routines or habits did you have in the military at West Point that you still adhere to?
I think the habits is the mindset of prioritization, Tim, that carries over from West Point to the time in the Army to now. I don't know if you want to call that a habit, but rather an approach where, every quarter, month, week, and day, it's what is most important. And prioritization is not, in my mind, about adding things. It's about what you're going to deliberately say no to. And so, all the way back at West Point, if I'm going to say no to studying for this T and instead go run stadiums with my roommate because we want to do X, Y, and Z in the future, the result of that is I'm not going to do as well in the T. And I'm okay with that because of the priorities I've set, right? And so entrepreneurship, there's an infinite number of things that you can do. And choosing the one or two things that you're going to move the needle on in a day, week, and month, and acknowledging that's about what you can accomplish effectively is truly the skill set that I've taken from West Point all the way through to running and operating Wove today.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking because Brian always tells me he's always like one shiny object at a time. It's so true. I think, being able to prioritize what's important right now and what's actually going to push the needle for the business. I think the biggest thing for me is finding life balance. Like, that Ranger mindset is you put your head down and you do until it's done. You won't be able to survive like that. And so I think it's super important to, take care of yourself, find time, to work out, make sure you're eating, sleeping. As silly as it sounds, they're things that you forget to do. And so, yeah, I think that, that goes back to your co-founder, goes back to your partner. For the first 6 months of Wove, Brian and I, we didn't take a paycheck. My wife was cooking meals for us. Was basically the honorary co-founder, cleaning up after our messes. But I think finding the right people that are going to support you and love you through is also a huge thing as well.
Andrew, I want to say recently you ran a marathon in Antarctica.
Yeah, that was my wife's doing. She signed us up for that. But it was awesome. It was a pretty great event. I probably wouldn't do it again. She's a wild woman.
I got to give Sarah Wolgemuth credit because she came in ahead of Andrew on that one. His training slacked a little bit.
Yeah, the startup bod isn't conducive to marathons anywhere, let alone Antarctica.
Let's move on to our final segment, giving back. What advice would you give to any young veterans listening who are just starting their civilian careers and want to start a company of their own? We kind of touched on this a little bit, but any more additional advice?
Yeah, I think the willingness of other West Pointers to provide you a perspective is unlike any other community. And so taking advantage of that, there's no one that's like, oh, you just left, Bain, or you just left Trinity College and I'm going to take a call with you because we both went to Trinity. I mean, and maybe there's a little bit of that, but not to the extreme sense of belonging that this community offers. And that's how I got started right at transitioning out of the military, just LinkedIn messaging a bunch of complete strangers that went to West Point in a lot of different spaces to test out ideas. And I think that's what makes this community very, very special. I try to use some of my time whenever asked to at least provide a perspective to folks that are curious to learn more. And I think in that, it's important to not inundate yourself with opinions that you put a lot of value on, but rather gain a diverse set of perspectives from folks in the community, and then sort of weigh the value of each of those perspectives based on, is this person on a path that I want to follow? And so I think the ability to reach out and the ability to weigh the value of the input that other folks give.
Yeah, I was going to kind of build on that as well. I've been really pleasantly surprised. I wouldn't even say surprised, but the West Point community is very eager to help other West Pointers. So I don't think I've ever reached out to a West Pointer on LinkedIn or via text or email without getting a response. We've seen that with Sam Ellis. We've seen it with you, Tim. Mike Leffer was, I rode crew with Mike. He was, help raise capital for our first round. And yeah, the network, I think, is something you have to lean into because I think it is very different than other educational institutions.
We close this podcast out. How are things at Wove? What are the next milestones, or what's the next ruck march you all are on?
Yeah, things are quite well at Wove, Tim. It's a very exciting time in the business. So just went through a small hiring sprint to grow the team pretty significantly to offer even more to our consumers. And so I guess a small thing that you'll get now that you wouldn't have gotten a year ago is you'll actually get unique video content of your ring being crafted from start to finish. We'll actually provide that to couples when they get their final ring so that, when they share with their friends and family, they actually kind of have this nice social proof of this thing being crafted right here in the US for them. So we're excited to be offering that with an amazing content creator here on site. And then really the next horizon is we're going to be launching a new version of the digital product here in about 2 months. And really what this is going to allow folks to do is to communicate in a more seamless way with their jewelry designer and share photos back and forth. We'll have a recommendation engine that'll be providing folks options based on how they answer quizzes and just really go through the experience in a more streamlined way. It's really driven through high touch in chat right now. And so we're taking that and we're productizing some of those touch points for folks all the way through curated diamond selection and getting your final appraisal. And that'll kind of all live in your Wove account forever. And so taking some of these things that are higher touch and just putting a UI around it that feels appropriate for the brand.
Amazing. That's unfortunately all the time we have, Brian and Andrew. However, once you all have tremendous success, please don't forget us and hope we can have you back on the podcast. This has been fantastic, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Thanks so much, Tim.
This has been a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.